When I look at the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act and the commingling of funds that would be allowed with FDIC-insured bank accounts and the legitimacy that it would provide to the entire crypto industry, I do think we need to hit the pause button on all of this and really think it through. Because bringing crypto into the real banking system would subject the entire economy to a contagion effect, like what happened in 2008. Right now, the FTX collapse and the destruction in the crypto market is contained because this merging with the banking sector hasn't been allowed to happen yet. And Congress is setting the stage for a merge with their bill.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can't stick to your story if you think it flies. But I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 265th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, thank you for checking it out. I know it takes a lot to convince someone to try out a podcast about Congress, but I think you're going to have a good time here. Because I'm a Congress watcher, and I've been doing this a long time, so I know some things. And lately, our Congress has been working on writing the laws that will govern the cryptocurrency industry. Now, in the last episode, which I really do consider part one of this two-part series, but in the last episode, you heard expert testimony to Congress that took place over the course of 3 years about what cryptocurrency is and isn't. Because while the word currency makes it sound like all of these are just funny money, and some of them certainly are, the infrastructure behind these so-called cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, that infrastructure is where the most exciting possibilities are in this industry. And Congress, as you heard, is being told that they have to be careful with their regulations, because if they treat cryptocurrencies as just regular old money, they run the risk of stomping out the promises of the blockchain technology. But on the other side of that, in this episode, we're also going to examine how they'd also run the risk of expanding the risks inherent in the current cryptocurrency industry to the entire economy if they don't get the regulations right. Because last month, cryptocurrency exchange FTX and most, but not all, of the businesses under the FTX umbrella went bankrupt, causing the entire cryptocurrency market to crash. As of this recording, on December 21st, 2022, Bitcoin is down 65% from where it was priced a year ago. Ethereum, which I will admit I have put some bets on, is down 70%. And FTT, which is a coin invented by FTX, the scammy kind of coin, the kind that can be invented and sold by just about anyone, the kind that you heard Congress warned about. Well, FTX had their own scammy coin called FTT, and that one is down 98% in a year. Cryptocurrency gamblers, of which, yes, I am one, we are on a downslope right now. And millions of our people around the world who used FTX to place bets had their chips essentially stolen from them. The money in their accounts, it's gone. And that's not just because the market is down. They lost their actual deposits. They can withdraw none of it, regardless of if they won or lost their bets. It's like if you went to Las Vegas and had a winning ticket in your hand and you feed it into the machine. Well, instead of getting a voucher back that you can exchange for cash, instead, these people are getting slips of paper that basically say, go f*** yourself, instead of a voucher. There's just nothing for them to turn in. And in this episode, you're going to learn directly from congressional testimony what happened to cause that bankruptcy. Because cryptocurrencies themselves have been widely blamed for the chaos. But I'll tell you right now that the heart of this story is good old-fashioned fraud. But also, direct from congressional testimony, you're also going to hear why the government wasn't able to spot and stop the fraud before it got so bad. This is the situation that is unique to cryptocurrency, because with this particular industry, in a lot of ways, when the cops are confronted with a cryptocurrency issue, the crypto cops have their hands tied behind their backs. And that's where Congress comes in, because it's up to Congress whether the crypto cops will keep those handcuffs on. But Congress has to be careful. Because as bad as the situation is for those people whose money is missing, and for the cryptocurrency industry as a whole, the rest of the economy seems relatively untouched by this. Which it doesn't have to be that way. Remember when professional Wall Street gamblers, the banksters, chopped up our mortgages, mixed solvent and junk mortgages together, called them all excellent, and sold them to each other, collecting loads of fees as they did it? Well, when they did that, they took down the whole world's economy with them when their game of hot potato went cold. But that isn't happening here, which is a very good thing. And so we're going to examine why the rest of the economy is not getting infected with this contagion. Because right now, the Senate has a bill on deck that seems to be the clear frontrunner for how cryptocurrencies would be policed. And the Senate is still going to be controlled by Democrats next year. And therefore, the same individuals who have been writing this bill will remain empowered. In fact, it's a bipartisan bill. So both of the people in both the Republican and Democratic Party who are at the top of that committee, they're not going anywhere. And so we're going to examine their ideas. And honestly, I'll warn you right now before we get into it, you're probably going to leave this episode with more questions than answers, because I did. You're probably going to have more questions about how the criminals at FTX got away with what they did and for so long. You're probably going to have questions about how much influence the rich kids at FTX had inside of Congress as they were showering our lawmakers in both parties with millions of dollars. And you're definitely going to have questions about what we should do about all of this. I don't have all of those answers. And in fact, I don't really have an opinion about what should be done. But you'll at least be up on the inside Congress conversation. And if you have opinions about what should be done, you will be able to intelligently speak to your members of Congress, or really their staffs, because members of Congress don't speak to peasants like you and I. But you will be able to know what is happening in Congress in order to share your opinion about the bill. That's the goal here, to give you information that you can act on if you choose to. And if you appreciate that, if you like getting highlights from Congress without having to watch all of the hearings yourself, with all of the members of Congress asking the same questions over and over again because they only show up for their own 5 minutes of questioning time, well, if you appreciate not having to sit through that, please pay for this show. Because I'll tell you right now, we're taking a huge hit during this holiday season, and I don't know why. And I'm trying not to focus on it. But, man, it's hard not to, especially with the workload that I have coming up. Because this Congress just did their entire job, the job that they were supposed to spend an entire year doing. They did the whole thing in the last week. So they're in the process right now of passing a war authorization bill that is over 4,000 pages long. And they're also simultaneously in the process of passing a government funding law with all kinds of shit attached that is also over 4,000 pages long. And I'm intending to spend the majority of my winter and spring going through those laws to find out what they did. It's hard work, and quite frankly, it sucks. And most everyone who's in the journalism business is going to move past these bills by January because it is so much easier to talk about the interpersonal in drama when covering Congress, to talk about the personalities in Congress. Will Kevin McCarthy become the speaker is going to be the congressional news that knocks these massive laws out of sight and out of mind by January 3rd. This happens every year, but I'm going to give these laws the attention they deserve. And honestly, even though I've been doing this now for 10 years, I still don't know exactly how to tackle over 8,000 pages of legislation landing on my desk all at once. Now, I am going to try a different strategy this year when I get to this in January. But that's my problem, not yours. The point I want to make right now is who does this? Who looks into these laws and details? Because I honestly wish I didn't have to. I wish corporate journalists with all of the millions at their disposal would take the months and use the staff they have to tell us what changes are being made to our laws in these massive bills. But they don't do that. Instead, they analyze the Trump-DeSantis poll numbers. Because let me tell you, it's easier to be a pundit. And I'm also finding out it's far more lucrative. But that part is up to you. Because you can keep listening to this show for free. That's allowed. But every time you download and don't pay, you're sending me a message that I'm kind of a sucker, that I really should be 100% throwing myself into the punditry. You're telling me that this show has no value to you. And if that's not the message you intend to send, I suggest you please pay something. Because I leave the amount up to you. You can buy me a beer or a coffee or whatever you would do if I gave you this information in person. Pay whatever you think is fair. It doesn't even have to be a lot. But I don't consider zero fair. And most of the people who listen to this show are contributing $0. And another thing I want to address is that I would rather not do this show at all than sell your time to companies. Because a lot of people do think that I should be airing ads on this show. But advertising has consequences. And millions of people are experiencing those consequences right now because of people who sold their voices, their credibility, and your time to FTX. Because it's likely that you heard of FTX before its bankruptcy. Because FTX paid some of the most famous people in America to convince you that your money was safe with FTX. So, for example, here's Shaquille O'Neal, one of the best Lakers to ever play basketball.
Hey, it's Shaquille O'Neal, and I'm excited to be partnering with FTX to help make crypto accessible for everyone. I'm all in. Are you?
Here's Steph Curry, another basketball player, this time the star of the Golden State Warriors.
I'm not an expert, and I don't need to be. With FTX, I have everything I need to buy, sell, and trade crypto safely.
And you know this one breaks my heart. Here is my favorite sports star of all time, the GOAT, the NFL's Tom Brady.
FTX is the safest and easiest way to buy and sell crypto. It's the best way to get in the game.
These people, who I am a fan of, and many others, Giselle, Larry David, Matt Damon, Naomi Osaka, Kevin O'Leary, a bunch of celebrities made money by telling people to trust FTX. They made money doing the exact thing that many of you think I should do to make money. You think I should lend my credibility to a company in return for cash, just like everybody else is doing. And f me for not doing it. That's my choice, and that's why you won't pay. But most people who get paid to advertise do not have insider information about the companies they tell you to trust. All of those celebrities did not look at FTX's accounting books to even make sure that they had accounting books. And I can tell you that when I'm offered money to run ads, which I am offered all the time, I'm never offered insider access into the company. I'm just offered the cash. But even if I insisted on insider access, even if I insisted upon visiting the Athletic Greens production facilities to inspect them myself, and if I researched every vitamin in the product to make sure that you weren't being told to buy blended lettuce branded as a miracle drug, which, by the way, I am not claiming that that's what Athletic Greens is. I am just letting you know I don't know what Athletic Greens is, and that's what I would have to do to find out. But even if I did that, even if I personally tested every Casper mattress and personally interviewed every therapist working at BetterHelp, due diligence like that takes time. And all of that would be time taken away from researching Congress. And so there's just no way to do the advertising thing right. I can either do what Steph Curry and Shaq and Tom Brady did and skip the due diligence and take the cash, but that sets you up to be scammed. Or I could do the due diligence and spend time researching the products that I'm lending my credibility to instead of researching the show, therefore making the show less frequent and probably worse. Those are both terrible options that don't serve any of us, except for those companies. The companies are the only ones that win. And so ads are not an option. So please stop sending me your friendly little emails telling me that you don't mind if I take ads. It's not an option. I'm not doing it. We run on the value for value model here, and it's the only way. Because these celebrities lending their credibility to FTX by getting paid for advertisements caused a lot of people to trust a company that was, quite frankly, a giant scam. The whole company was a scam. FTX was a multinational corporation headquartered in the Bahamas that made money from operating a centralized cryptocurrency exchange. And so essentially, people in more than 130 countries would deposit actual money, like dollars or yen or euros or whatever, into FTX, and they would use that exchange to buy crypto, to bet on crypto, hoping the prices of whatever they bought would go up. The FTX exchange would, in the meantime, hold those deposits, make the trades, make the bets for the customer, with FTX itself making money on fees. Or at least, that's how it was supposed to work. And for years, millions of people thought that it did because FTX's exchange was the world's third largest before we found out that it gambled away its customers' money. To explain what exactly happened, you're now going to hear a mashup of testimony provided to the House of Representatives by John J. Ray III, who was appointed the new CEO of FTX just before the company filed for bankruptcy. And to be clear, this guy was not involved in the scam at all. He was brought in to be the fixer. He was brought in to manage the bankruptcy. And he has experience in managing bankruptcies caused by giant scams, as he was the guy that managed Enron's bankruptcy back during the W. Bush years. But I want to be clear that John Ray is not a villain in this story, despite his current title of FTX CEO. And so here are the highlights from his testimony to the House Financial Services Committee on December 13th, 2022. And in this series of sound clips from the 4-hour-long hearing, you're going to hear questions posed by Representative Patrick McHenry of North Carolina. Here's John Ray.
I accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer of FTX in the early morning hours of November 11. Immediately it became clear to me that Chapter 11 was the best course available to preserve any remaining value of FTX. Therefore, my first act as CEO was to authorize the Chapter 11 filings. For structural purposes and just for ease of presentation, we tried to take the over 100 entities and we put those in 4 silos. To demystify that, it's very simple. There was a U.S. silo, which was the FTX U.S. exchange for U.S. investors. There was an international exchange called FTX.com, again for non-U.S. persons that invested in crypto. There was Alameda, which is purely a crypto hedge fund, which made other investments, venture capital type investments. Then there's a 4th entity, which was purely investments. And although our investigation is not complete, those investments were most likely made with either Alameda money or money that originally came from FTX.com. But that 4th silo is just purely investments.
And who owned those 4 silos?
All those entities were, owned or controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried.
What was the relationship between FTX.com and FTX US? Was there a distinction between the two?
There was a public distinction between the two. What we're seeing, though, is that the crypto assets for both FTX.com and for FTX US were housed in the same database. It's called the AWS system, which is just an acronym for Amazon Web Services. It was all housed in the same web format.
And is that distinct from Alameda's assets?
Yes, it is. The Alameda Fund, well, that's just the fund that, that drew resources from the exchanges. So it's really separate. It was not for customers per se. It was just simply a hedge fund.
So then Alameda Research and the venture capital businesses, what did Alameda Research do?
Essentially made crypto investments, engaged in margin trading, took long and short positions in crypto, essentially invested in crypto. But of course, we now know also invested in over $5 billion of other assets, which are in a variety of sectors.
Now, I want to pause here for a second to talk about those other assets, which were held by the hedge fund branch of FTX called Alameda Research. A big chunk of those other assets were crypto coins that were invented by FTX itself and then sold to Alameda at wildly inflated prices, making it look like the coins themselves were more valuable than they were and that Alameda Research had more financial value within it than it actually had.
So funds were taken from customers, funds were invested, trading losses incurred in Alameda, and then funds were deployed that will never be, valued at the same dollar amount. There was over $5 billion of investments made. Certainly there's some value there, and we will try to get that value and sell those assets. But oftentimes, even when he made those sorts of investments, whether it was directly or through others in management, sometimes he would do that really without any pro forma or any valuation. Not really quite sure how some of the purchase price numbers were derived. So it gives you a sort of worry, obviously, that the purchases were overvalued. So there's a concern there as well.
The fact that FTX and Alameda Research were claiming wealth made up of money that they invented, the fact that much of Alameda's hedge fund's wealth was in FTT, That partially explains the multi-billion-dollar cash shortfall that led to FTX's bankruptcy and why it's going to be hard to get all of FTX's customers their money back. Billions of the FTX and Alameda dollars were simply fake. They used their fake wealth to then borrow real money and then couldn't pay back their loans. And I know that I'm using FTX, which is the name of the exchanges, both foreign and domestic, and Alameda, the hedge fund, interchangeably. And here's why. So let's get back to this December 13th hearing in the House, starting with Representative Ann Wagner of Missouri questioning FTX CEO, the not a bad guy, John Ray. You're also going to hear questions posed by Representative Warren Davidson of Ohio.
Reports suggest that FTX.com transferred more than half of its customer funds, roughly $10 billion, to Alameda Research. Is that accurate, sir?
Our work is not done. We don't have exact numbers for you today, but I will say it's several $billion in that range. So we know that the size of the harm was significant.
Right. So when customers deposited funds into their FTX accounts, where did the cash go?
Well, sometimes the money wasn't deposited in the FTX account. It was sent to Alameda to begin with. So
it was misdirected from the start, straight to Alameda.
There was certainly some time period where there's no bank account at .com. And then ultimately, if you look at the structure of this, Alameda was essentially a customer on that .com exchange and effectively, borrowed money from or just transferred money from FTX customers to take its own positions on the Alameda hedge fund. Alameda was a customer, if you will, of the exchange, and it's through that customer relationship plus other arrangements that allowed Alameda to borrow those funds and then take positions on the exchange like anyone, who would hedge, an asset in the market. He had unusually large positions, of course, and sometimes they were wrong in those positions and they resulted in big losses. But ultimately, the commingling issue is the same and a different issue. He took the money from FTX to cover those positions. And ultimately, when customers went to get their money back from .com, there was a run on the bank. While many things are unknown at this stage, we're at a very preliminary stage, many questions remain. We know the following. First, customer assets at FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform. That much is clear. Second, Alameda used client funds to engage in margin trading, which exposed customer funds to massive losses. Third, the FTX group went on a spending binge in 2021 and 2022, during which $5 billion was spent on a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may only be worth a fraction of what was paid for them. Fourth, loans and other payments were made to insiders in excess of $1.5 billion. Fifth, Alameda's business model as a market maker required funds to be deployed to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain of those foreign jurisdictions. The loans that were given to Mr. Bankman-Fried were not just one loan, it was numerous loans, some of which were documented by individual promissory notes. There's no description of what the purpose of the loan was. In one instance, he signed both as the issuer of the loan as well as the recipient of the loan. But we have no information at this time as to what the purpose or the use of those funds were, and that is part of our investigation. The FTX group is unusual in the sense that, I've done probably a dozen large, scale bankruptcies over my career, including Enron, of course. Every one of those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks.
QuickBooks?
QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company. There's no independent board, right? We had one person really controlling this. No independent board. That's highly unusual in a size company this is. And it's made all more complex because we're not dealing with, widgets or something that's tangible. We're dealing with crypto. And the technological issues are made worse when you're dealing with an asset such as crypto. It's virtually, unlimited in terms of the lack of controls. No centralized records on banking, no daily reconciliations of crypto assets, silos where there's no insurance, inadequate insurance, no independent board, no safeguards that limit who controls an asset. So senior management literally could get access to any of the accounts in any of the silos. No separateness between customer money and other customer money or other assets. It's virtually unlimited in terms of the lack of controls. And that's really the point of the unprecedented comment. I've just never seen anything like it in all 40 years of doing restructuring work and corporate legal work. It's just a dearth of information. I've just never seen an utter lack of record keeping. Absolutely no internal controls whatsoever. The FTX Group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices have identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. The storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption. The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets. The lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets. In the absence of audited or reliable financial statements. The lack of personnel in financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group. A fundamental challenge we face is that we're in many respects starting from near zero in terms of the corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect in a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
So that's a pretty fraud-filled situation. And so now let's take a look at the harm done and what FTX's new CEO is trying to do to get customers their money back. In this clip, John Ray is going to refer to hot wallets and cold wallets. And I do think it's worth taking a minute to explain the difference, because if you do have crypto assets, this is important to know. And this knowledge will help you to protect your money from the next crypto exchange bankruptcy. Because it is possible, due to the lack of regulation in this industry, that other exchanges could be screwing around with customer funds too. And so essentially, a hot wallet is an account holding crypto assets online. They're connected to the internet. And so when you send me a crypto donation, and thank you, by the way, to those of you who are buying the dip and sending Ethereum and Bitcoin my way lately, I do enjoy them. But when you send me those to my wallet, they're going to a hot wallet at Coinbase. Now, I'm not giving advice here because I'm gambling in the Wild West casino of crypto, and I am perfectly aware that I could get fucked over in this space just like anybody else. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. But I do like Coinbase the most out of the available exchanges and hot wallet options because they have been working with regulators, and I do know that they subject their company to audits conducted by real auditing firms, which FTX and some other exchanges do not do. So I like Coinbase. But even though I have a hot wallet, which is necessary for buying and selling crypto assets, The vast majority of my crypto assets are not on Coinbase anymore or on any other internet-connected hot wallet. The vast majority of my funds are on a cold wallet, which is a device that mine looks like a USB drive that takes my crypto off the internet. Although I shouldn't. To be more accurate, my assets actually live on the blockchain like everybody else's. But by using a cold wallet to hold my crypto, no one can hack into my account and steal what I have. And no one in the company that I would be trusting to hold my crypto can transfer it to their hedge fund and gamble it away. And so that's what he's referring to in this next clip when he refers to hot and cold wallets. But out of all of this, I do think that a lesson that should be learned here, or one of them anyway, is that if you are going to play in the crypto casino, it is wise to invest in a cold wallet to get your funds off of the internet and away from the care of the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world. I have included some resources in the show notes if you want some more information on this. But in the Wild West, we have to protect ourselves. Okay, so back to John Ray and his testimony about the challenges he's facing in his quest to get customers their money back.
The principal issue that the company is facing in the crypto area, and it is from a technology perspective, it is different from the other bankruptcies because it is it's not a plane, not a boat. It's this crypto asset, and it has inherently some difficulties. The assets can be taken or lost. We have assets that are in what are called hot wallets, and those are in cold wallets. Hot wallets are very vulnerable to hacking. If you've done any looking on the internet, you'll find that hacking is almost ordinary course in this business sector. There are lots of vulnerability to the wallets. So this company, unfortunately, had a very, very challenging record here. For some, transfers, there was no pathway for it. Our keys aren't stored in a centralized location. We don't know where all of our wallets are. Passwords were sometimes kept in just plain text format. So this company was sort of uniquely positioned to fail. At the end of the day, we're not going to be able to recover all the losses here. Right? Money was spent that we'll never get back. There will be losses on the international side. We're hopeful on the U.S. side. He'll answer to others related to what happened here. Our job is just to find the assets and try to get customers their money back as quickly as possible.
As of this recording, FTX has $8 billion that it can't pay to as many as 1 million customers, at least 10 of whom are owed over $100 million each. We know that the largest customer is due $226 million. Now, we don't know who exactly the large investors are, but we do know that FTX had received money from some massive real economy investment firms, including Sequoia Capital, BlackRock, and Tiger Global, as well as funds that held money for regular people, such as the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan. And since it's unclear what the laws are, no one knows if those people will ever get their money back. But plenty of people are trying. Here's Representative Nadia Velasquez of New York questioning John Ray.
Mr. Ray, a number of debtors in the FTX group are located in offshore jurisdictions. Will this complicate the efforts to retrieve the assets of those debtors? If so, why?
No, I don't think it will complicate it at all. The various jurisdictions historically in bankruptcy, and I've been in a number of cross-border situations, the jurisdictions will cooperate with each other. The regulators in all these jurisdictions, I think, realize that everyone's there for a common purpose to protect the victims and recover assets for the victims of these situations.
How much have you been able to secure, and where are most of these assets located?
We've been able to secure, over $1 billion of assets. We've secured those to cold wallets in a secure location. It's an ongoing process, though, which will take weeks and perhaps months to secure all of the assets.
Are most creditors located in the U.S. or foreign jurisdictions?
The majority of the creditors trade through the .com silo and are outside of this jurisdiction, although there are some foreign customers that are on the U.S. silo and vice versa. But again, users had multiple accounts. For example, if they had a different trading position, they may have opened multiple accounts. We know it's a big number. It's in the millions on the customer accounts, and we know it's several $billion in losses. Assigning those losses to customer accounts will be our next challenge.
So they're working on undoing the harm, but it's clear that some of it can't be undone. But that does make one wonder how a scam on that scale, a company controlling billions of dollars, barely using QuickBooks, it makes you wonder how no one in our government noticed the fraud and how this was allowed to continue for years. To the point that the company could buy Super Bowl ads and rename a Miami stadium after themselves and not get any scrutiny whatsoever? Well, it turns out they actually were under some scrutiny. At the time of the bankruptcy, FTX was under investigation by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and these agencies were investigating whether FTX was breaking rules about safeguarding customer deposits and if there were any illegal financial entanglements with trading affiliates. And we know now the answer to both of those questions was clearly yes. They were also under investigation to determine whether their trading and lending programs were properly registered with the Securities Exchange Commission, which is the Wall Street police. And this past summer, FTX was also sent a cease and desist letter by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is a part of our government that guarantees the money in our bank accounts so that if our bank disappears, our money, at least up to $250,000 per person per bank, does not. The FDIC said that it had, quote, reason to believe that FTX US and its related entities, by and through their officers, directors, or employees, have made false and misleading statements, directly or by implication concerning FTX US's deposit insurance status, unquote. Specifically, the FDIC was pissed that FTX identified as an FDIC-insured cryptocurrency exchange on the Smart Asset website and the cryptosec.info website. The president of FTX US, Brett Harrison, also tweeted to his followers in July that, quote, direct deposits from employers to FTX US are stored in individually FDIC-insured bank accounts in the user's names, unquote, and that, quote, stocks are held in FDIC-insured and SIPC-insured brokerage accounts, unquote. To which the FDIC responded, quote, in fact, FTX US is not FDIC-insured. The FDIC does not insure any brokerage accounts, and FDIC insurance does not cover stocks or cryptocurrency, unquote. And so it wasn't like FTX wasn't on the government's radar. It was all over the government's radar. But FTX was on the government's radar in multiple ways, especially FTX's CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, because he was trusted in the halls of Congress. In fact, he was called to Congress to give our lawmakers advice. And as a bonus to our lawmakers, he gave much more than advice when he was there. So let's take the group of 8 House members, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, who have been nicknamed the Blockchain 8 by the brilliant writers at the American Prospect. Let's look at how they had FTX on their radar. Because these 8 members of Congress, Republicans Tom Emmer of Minnesota, Warren Davidson of Ohio, Byron Donalds of Florida, and Ted Budd of North Carolina, along with Democrats Darren Soto of Florida, Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, Josh Gottenheimer of New Jersey, and Richie Torres of New York. Well, this group earned the Blockchain 8 nickname after they sent a letter to the SEC, the Wall Street police, essentially telling the police to stop policing cryptocurrency and blockchain firms. They said in their letter that the SEC's efforts to police the unregulated cryptocurrency and blockchain industry participants with voluntary document requests, quote, might be at odds with the Paperwork Reduction Act, unquote, because, quote, federal agencies must be good stewards of the public's time and not overwhelm them with unnecessary or duplicative requests for information, unquote. Now, FTX was one of those firms receiving information requests from the SEC, requests about the very activities that have brought down the company. The SEC wanted information about how, for example, FTX was handling customer deposits. The SEC also asked FTX about a rewards program that gave depositors interest on their crypto assets, which would have made them a security. Had FTX been forced to turn over that information, they might have been regulated as a security, which would have then forced them to open their books to the Wall Street police, who probably would have noticed that the books were written in crayon. But efforts were made by the bipartisan Blockchain 8 to make sure that FTX and other crypto exchanges were not subject to such a paperwork burden. And in news that you probably won't find surprising, 5 of the 8 members of the group that sent this letter received campaign donations from FTX employees, ranging from $2,900 to $11,600 each. And Representative Ted Budd of North Carolina, who has just been promoted to Senator of North Carolina, well, he received $500,000 in support from a super PAC created by FTX co-CEO Ryan Salame. But I do want to shine a spotlight for a moment on Representative Tom Emmer of Minnesota, who is the main author of that letter and who, come January, is posed to be the 3rd most powerful Republican in the House of Representatives after that party takes control. Well, Tom Emmer is currently the chair of the National Republican Congressional Committee and the NRCC's associated super PAC, the Congressional Leadership Fund, which accepted $2.75 million from FTX in the 2022 cycle. $2 million from co-CEO Ryan Salame in late September, and $750,000 from the company's Political Action Committee. And Tom Emmer himself personally collected more than $78,000 in donations from the crypto industry, executives, employees, and political action committees for his election in 2022. And here is how that guy, Representative Tom Emmer, used his time in a hearing that took place last December in the House Committee on Financial Services to question Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX when he had the chance.
Now, it's my understanding that FTX uses surveillance trade technology akin to the technology national securities exchanges use to protect investors and ensure sound spot markets. What does this technology and any other tools FTX uses to protect the spot market from fraud and manipulation look like?
Yeah, so, like other exchanges, we do have these technologies in addition to the, know your customer policies that we can identify individuals associated with trades. We have surveillance for unusual trading activity. We have manual inspections of anything that, gets flagged either by the automated surveillance or by manual inspection. And we do this with the trading activity, with the deposits, the withdrawals, and everything else.
Sounds like you're doing a lot to make sure there is no fraud or other manipulation. I thank you, Mr. Bankman-Fried,
Thank you.
Again, for helping us understand the extensive guardrails a cryptocurrency exchange like FTX has in place to ensure sound crypto spot markets for investors.
That's the type of scrutiny that Sam Bankman-Fried received from Congress. He was invited to testify about what he thought Congress should do to regulate the crypto industry that had made him a young billionaire. He was praised for his efforts to secure customer funds by members of Congress that were taking money from people in his company. Sam Bankman-Fried himself was the number 5 biggest spender on the 2022 midterm elections. Now, it's been widely reported that Sam Bankman-Fried gave most of his $40 million to members of the Democratic Party, but his co-CEO at FTX gave about $24 million to Republicans. And so basically, members of Congress from both parties were showered with cash by the heads of FTX over the last 2 years. And members of both parties worked to accomplish FTX goals in Congress. This is not a partisan issue. It's a corporatism issue, and I wish more commentators would frame it as such. This is a story about how companies use their money in Washington, D.C. to get members of Congress to rig the rules for themselves. It's a story of the blind eyes that they buy from well-intentioned people in power. Because members of Congress want to write bills that make sense and that don't piss off too many people. And so when writing bills, they call in experts for help. And what experts do they call? Well, they call the ones they've met. They call the ones they trust. And if someone has given you money, it's just human nature to like and trust that person more than others. And so if you put yourself in the shoes of these Congress members, you can see how this happens with no evil intent. But outside their bubble, we live in the effects of this legalized corruption. And accounts are missing. And so it's worth looking at who has been taking FTX money and willfully or not blinding their own eyes with the good feelings that come along with receiving big, fat, easy checks. Because a large percentage of a very important committee, the Senate Agriculture Committee, which is taking the lead in writing the bill that would govern cryptocurrency policing, well, these are people who are guaranteed to have experienced this goodwill effect in regards to FTX over the last few years. Because out of the 22 senators on the Senate Agriculture Committee, we know that at least 9 of them got money funneled to them from the FTX bros. The chair of the committee is Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, who isn't really a big Senate celebrity. You might recognize her from her resemblance to a wax figure Golden Girl. Well, that woman, who you may have heard of or not, she's quite powerful in this realm, and Sam Bankman-Fried donated $26,600 to Stabenow's campaign and was invited to give advice to Congress a few weeks later. The highest-ranking Republican on the committee, Senator John Boozman of Arkansas, also took money from Sam Bankman-Fried. He took $5,800. But Boozman got most of his FTX money from the other FTX CEO, Ryan Salame, who used his super PAC to pay for $1.2 million in ads and crap mail to help Boozman win his Republican Party primary. From the top of the committee to the bottom, FTX showered this committee with money. Over 40% of the committee took money from the FTX bros, and then that committee wrote a bill, a bipartisan bill, that took Sam Bankman-Fried's wishes into account. Sam Bankman-Fried, when he was giving advice to Congress, had 2 main goals. The goal he was pursuing the longest and the hardest was that FTX's Sam Bankman-Fried wanted the Commodity Futures Trading Commission to police crypto markets, rather than the better-funded Securities and Exchange Commission, which I keep calling the Wall Street Police. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which I'm going to refer to from here on forward as the CFTC, well, it became a thing in 1922 when the government started policing people who were betting on future prices of grain. Over the years, it expanded to police bets on the future prices of other items, like metals and oil. And then, in the wake of the financial crash of 2008, the CFTC expanded again to police bets on the future prices of so-called financial products, which is the path that leads it to policing cryptocurrencies. That path jumped from theoretical to paved in 2014, when the CFTC chairman, Mark Wetjen, allowed a company called Terra Exchange to bet on the future price of Bitcoin. Now, the company immediately broke the CFTC's rules and essentially got away with it by promising to pinky swear it won't be bad again. But the point is that with that situation, the CFTC became a crypto cop by just doing it. And by barely policing betting on the future price of Bitcoin, Mark Wetjen, as the chair of the CFTC, legally legitimized the betting on the future price of Bitcoin. And then, a year later, CFTC chairman Mark Wetjen, the guy that allowed the Bitcoin futures betting to happen, he left the government and joined the board of a crypto company called LedgerX, which is a crypto derivatives exchange, as in a company that makes money on the exact behavior, betting on the future prices of cryptocurrencies, that this guy had just legally legitimized as the head of the CFTC. After he joined the board, LedgerX got 3 CFTC licenses from Wetjen's former employees at the CFTC, legally allowing betting on crypto future prices. And then FTX bought LedgerX, which meant that the Obama-era CFTC chairman was now working for Sam Bankman-Fried. And on top of that, another former CFTC commissioner, Jill Summers, joined Sam Bankman-Fried's company a few months ago. So what I'm trying to say here is that FTX had connections at the highest levels of the CFTC. FTX hired people from the highest levels of the CFTC. And the CEO of FTX wanted the CFTC to be its policeman. Now, this might be obvious, but when you ask why, well, after witnessing the CFTC's history of legitimizing crypto betting and letting crypto companies off with a slap on the wrist for breaking laws, and then hiring former CFTC commissioners to work for him, Sam Bankman-Fried apparently told other crypto executives that the industry would get more favorable treatment from the CFTC than from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is much larger and has been much more aggressive already in policing the crypto industry to the extent that they're allowed to. For example, the SEC has demanded that crypto assets register as securities, which would force the companies to split up their exchanges and their trading into separate wings of their companies. But the industry has refused to do so. Because what are these assets exactly? Are they securities? Are they commodities? Are they scams? Who knows? But in the meantime, the SEC can fine companies who don't comply with their rules out of existence. And the crypto companies clearly don't like that. So they have lobbied for and helped to write a bill that would essentially strip the SEC's claimed jurisdiction. And that bill is sitting on deck in the Senate Agriculture Committee. And the committee members, 40% of whom took money recently from the CEOs of FTX, they are clearly committed to moving it forward, even after the FTX collapse. But before we get wonky on what the bill does, here's why the Senate Agriculture Committee is deciding how cryptocurrency is to be policed in the first place. Because I know when I think of agriculture, I think corn and cows. And so how in the hell are they deciding who polices bets on Bitcoin? Well, here's Senator John Boozman of Arkansas, who's the guy that got that $1.2 million worth of political ads paid for by FTX's super PAC.
Many have asked, why is the Ag Committee involved in this? The Ag Committee is involved because this committee and no other committee in the Senate is responsible for the oversight of the nation's commodity markets. Bitcoin, although a cryptocurrency, is a commodity. It's a commodity in the eyes of the federal courts and the opinion of the SEC chairman. There's no dispute about this. If there are exchanges where commodities are traded, be it wheat, oil, or Bitcoin, then they must be regulated. It's simply that simple.
But is it that simple? Because how exactly do you classify imaginary money as a commodity? Because this committee and that commission, all of it began because people were betting on the future prices of actual things, grain, metals, oil, things. You can hold them. And even when it comes to money, US dollars, you can hold them. They're actual things. And even derivatives, financial products. After 2008, the CFTC got jurisdiction over derivatives. And while confusing, derivatives are made up of US dollars. Again, they're made up of actual things. But Bitcoins? How are Bitcoins or Ethereum tokens actually different from the made-up tokens and cryptocurrencies other than them being much more widely accepted? Because no one can physically pick up a Bitcoin or a Dogecoin or an FTT or any of these other so-called digital coins. And so I really struggle to understand how any of them can be considered commodities, considering none of them exist in the physical world. But regardless of my confusion, this is what's being said in Congress, that Bitcoin, the most widely accepted and held cryptocurrency, is a commodity because they say so. And the bill already written in the Senate Agriculture Committee, the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act, well, it says, quote, the commission shall have exclusive jurisdiction over any account, agreement, contract, or transaction involving a digital commodity trade, unquote. Which, if Bitcoin is a digital commodity, as they say it is, that would give the CFTC the exclusive jurisdiction over Bitcoin. And so I can see why some who think the SEC, the bigger and better funded Wall Street police, would be a more effective regulator. I could see how people who think that would be concerned by this bill, because this bill would clearly shield Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum, because that's being tossed around as a commodity too. It would clearly shield anything classified as a commodity from being policed by the SEC. Although I should note that the bill does allow dual registration, as in registration not only as a digital commodity broker with the CFTC, but also as an exchange broker or dealer with the SEC. But that word, exclusive jurisdiction, that would clearly make Bitcoin policing the domain of the CFTC. And in that context, only the CFTC. And as for the rules that would be put in place, well, the bill orders the owners of exchanges to make rules instead of Congress making the rules that the exchanges have to follow. In fact, the CFTC isn't even required to make the rules. For example, the bill says that the owners of these companies would have to conform with conduct standards, quote, as may be prescribed by the commission, unquote, that relate to fraud. And so Congress isn't setting standards in this bill or even requiring that the commission set standards. Their companies are told to have standards, but the details are left up to them, and the commission can get involved if it wants to. Even regulator involvement is voluntary. It's the companies that would make the rules. The bill also opens up loopholes that would allow customer funds and company funds to be combined. Quoting from the bill, quote, for convenience, unquote. Combined in real, like FDIC-insured bank accounts and on digital commodity platforms. At this point, what I'm wondering is, are we really trying to make life for exchanges like FTX more convenient? Is that the goal here? Because it seems to me like security, not convenience, should be the priority. And considering that the commingling of customer and hedge funds was at the center of the bankruptcy, this clause is all kinds of concerning. Because the minute you allow the commingling of funds like this in bank accounts that are FDIC insured, that's when this cryptocurrency economy and our actual economy overlap. That's where you could be allowing things that go wrong in the cryptocurrency industry to become a contagion that would affect the rest of the economy. Right now, they're separate. But if this bill were to become law and commingling of funds like that were allowed, they would be separate no more. And that should be a very big concern. Along those same lines, the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act would also allow the CFTC to write rules that allow customer funds to be lent out, which is essentially legalize what Sam Bankman-Fried did, lending customer money to another company that then gambled with it and lost. And so when I look at this bill, I see sections that definitely need more scrutiny, because it seems to me like they're asking for trouble. And I can also see why Sam Bankman-Fried himself would lobby so hard for this bill. But I do want to say that it's not all concerning. It's not all bad, because what would definitely be an improvement are the clauses that require the exchange owners to give information to the CFTC, no more voluntary, including what financial integrity protections they have in place. Because one of the reasons that FTX was able to become such a large scam, even though it was on the government's radar via the Justice Department, Securities Exchange Commission, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the FDIC, one of the reasons, despite being on the radar of all those agencies, that FTX was able to continue to grow to the size that it did was because the regulators' hands were tied. So here's Rostin Benham. He is the current chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And in this group of clips from the hearing that took place in the Senate Agriculture Committee on December 1st, you will also hear a question posed by top Republican on the committee, Senator John Boozman of Arkansas. But here is him explaining what kind of bind the regulators are in.
In terms of regulation of cash markets, right, the spot market, we simply do not have authority to register cash market exchanges or any intermediary, broker-dealer, or entity within that structure. And that's what concerns me, right? This is the gap. Unfortunately, when we act, it's often after the fact, because the information that allows us to bring an enforcement action in digital asset cash commodity markets is only because information is coming to us from outsiders, from referrals, from tips, and whistleblowers. And this is in stark contrast to some of the surveillance tools and examination tools that we would have if we had a comprehensive regulatory framework over digital asset commodities.
If FTX.com had been a registered U.S. exchange, would the CFTC have been able to mitigate what happened?
Senator, with our current authority, the answer is no. We need the authority to get into a CFTC registered exchange. As you point out, if we have that authority and they were registered, given what we know from the facts about conflicts of interest, commingling funds, books and records, we would have been able to prohibit it. And I would point to what we're doing with LedgerX. On a daily basis, our staff is in direct communication, not only with LedgerX, but the custodians themselves, able to identify customer property and customer money. Imagine that scenario with FTX US. If we had a daily lens into the location of customer money and customer property, you can imagine, given what we've learned about what's happened with FTX, we could have certainly prohibited many of the actions that we're hearing about. I have asked Congress directly for clear authority to impose our traditional regulatory regime over the digital asset commodity market.
And so that's the motivation behind the bill, despite all of its possible flaws. And the reason I want to bring this up and highlight it for you today is that the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee, who again is keeping her power in the next Congress, she's defending this bill even after the FTX bankruptcy. Here's Senator Debbie Stabenow on December 1st.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. The Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act does not take authority away from other financial regulators, nor does it make the CFTC the primary crypto regulator. Because crypto assets can be used in many different ways, no single financial regulator has the expertise or the authority to regulate the entire industry.
But Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency, and if it's classified as a commodity, and if the CFTC gets exclusive jurisdiction over Bitcoin, that does seem to prevent the SEC from doing anything. Exclusive jurisdiction sounds, well, exclusive to me. But the point is that she's clearly standing by this bill. And perhaps one of the reasons is personal. Because the head of the CFTC, the guy you just heard, Rostin Benham, is her former staffer. And so she must trust the dude. And he has been pushing hard for and helped the committee write this bill, which would expand his agency's power, and you have to assume it's appropriations. It's money. Even though in fairness, this is what he's saying in public.
I have not been shy about my encouragement of bills that contemplate shared responsibility for the CFTC and the Securities Exchange Commission, where the SEC would utilize its existing authority and reporting regime requirements for all security tokens, while the CFTC would apply its market-based rules for the more limited subset of commodity tokens, which do not have the same characteristics of security tokens.
And again, I don't understand how any of these tokens fit into either category. They seem to be their own thing, and trying to squeeze the biggest two, Bitcoin and Ethereum, into the commodity box does seem to accomplish the goals set forth by crypto criminal Sam Bankman-Fried, who definitely had the ear of the former staffer of the Senate Agriculture Committee chairman and current CFTC chairman, Rostin Benham.
I can, though, share with this committee with respect to me, my team and I have taken an initial review of my calendar, and what we've observed is that my team and I met with Mr. Bankman-Fried and his team. Over the past 14 months, we met 10 times in the CFTC office at their request, all in relation to this DCO, this clearinghouse application. 9 out of the 10 times we were in Washington. One was at a widely held conference in Florida earlier this year. In addition, there were 2 phone calls, I believe, and a number of messages, all in relation to the DCO application, providing us updates, suggesting that they were answering questions from different divisions, and trying, as I said, to doggedly move the application along and to get it approved.
So the application he's referring to, in which he wants us to believe is the only topic discussed in all 10 to 12 of their recent meetings, well, the application was for an innovative idea that Sam Bankman-Fried had that would allow FTX's American customers to borrow money directly from FTX to bet on the future prices of cryptocurrencies. It basically wanted to allow FTX's American customers to all be Alameda Research. Because under current regulations, Americans have to go through a professional broker to make those kinds of bets, using money they don't actually have. And there are competing cryptocurrency companies that have set that up for us if we want to do it. So, for example, cryptocurrency exchanges CME Group and Coinbase both work with brokers to place those kinds of bets. And both of those companies considered Sam Bankman-Fried's idea too risky, and they opposed it, even though their own companies could have benefited from that freedom as well. And the CFTC was clearly considering allowing Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX to expand their business in this risky way, which I bring up to show that the CFTC has already exhibited a pattern as permissive crypto police. And the fact that the CFTC was already regulating a part of FTX's business, the Ledger X part, was used during his scamming years to tell Congress that the CFTC was an effective regulator of crypto. Here's Sam Bankman-Fried himself testifying to Congress almost exactly a year ago on December 8th, 2021 to the House Committee on Financial Services, as he kept insisting that FTX was effectively regulated by the CFTC.
We are already regulated and licensed. We have many licenses globally. Here in the United States, we are regulated by states under the money service business and money transmitting regime. And we are regulated nationally by the CFTC, where we have a DCO, a DCM, a swap execution facility, and other licensure.
So he kept telling Congress, yep, we're regulated by the CFTC, all good. But I do have to mention that there's one superstar. This is the first time she's ever ended up on my radar, but I like this chick. There's one superstar on the House Committee on Financial Services who figured out the linguistic gymnastics that Sam Bankman-Fried was playing and called him out on it in the hearing. And so allow me to introduce you to Representative Cindy Axne of Iowa, who did a damn good job on December 8th, 2021.
Mr. Bankman-Fried, I'd like to start by asking you the first question. FTX US has a derivatives platform and recently bought Ledger X as part of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And that platform is registered with the CFTC. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to clarify something, and this isn't to say anybody's doing any wrong. It's just to get the lay of the land. You also have an exchange for Bitcoin and other tokens, but that is not registered with either the CFTC or the SEC. Is that correct?
That's correct. Currently, neither of them are primary markets regulators for spot Bitcoin to USD markets.
Okay, thank you. And I know you're registered as a money transmitter, but that's not the same kind of oversight that we'll see from a federal market regulator. I also sit on the Agriculture Committee, which oversees the CFTC, so a gap like this is especially concerning to me. And the big problem that I see here, from what I understand, is that the CFTC doesn't have regulatory authority for spot trading of commodities, just their derivatives. So that leaves consumers with inconsistent protections, which is a concern that I have.
And she nailed it. Because only one section of FTX's business, Ledger X, was already licensed and registered with the CFTC. And the CFTC did nothing with the regulatory authority they had, quite possibly because they couldn't, to stop Sam Bankman-Fried from taking his customers' money via FTX.us and FTX.com and funneling it to himself and his hedge fund to gamble with. But regardless of the handcuffs, it seems quite clear to me that the relationship between the crypto cop and the criminal simply appears to have been way too close. And the relationship between the lawmakers and the generous, rich crypto criminal appears to also have been way too close. Which is the only way that my brain can process an idea like Sam Bankman-Fried getting away with collecting billions and being consulted by Congress for help while simultaneously pulling off one of the biggest scams of all time. And so now we come to what do we do about this? And this is where my brain gets real fuzzy. Because before we jump to the conclusion that more regulation is needed and that it needs to be detailed and strict, I do want to point out that this massive company's failure is not bringing down the global economy, like it was brought down when the conventional and investment banks committed very similar crimes during the W. Bush years. The fact that cryptocurrencies are not mixed up with the regular economy because it's not allowed, and because the regulators haven't written rules to allow it, that's keeping our general economy largely immune to this disaster. And like I kind of mentioned before, but I really want to emphasize, when I look at the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act and the commingling of funds that would be allowed with FDIC-insured bank accounts and the legitimacy that it would provide to the entire crypto industry, I do think we need to hit the pause button on all of this and really think it through. Because bringing crypto into the real banking system would subject the entire economy to a contagion effect, like what happened in 2008. Right now, the FTX collapse and the destruction in the crypto market is contained because this merging with the banking sector hasn't been allowed to happen yet. And Congress is setting the stage for a merge with their bill. In the wake of this bankruptcy, the drumbeat of the punditry is that we need crypto market regulation and we need it right now. But this needs to be done right. And as we examined in the last episode, the blockchain technology is the most exciting part of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. And by treating cryptocurrencies as simply another kind of money, that could ruin all of the good that blockchains could do. But at the same time, legitimizing the industry could subject the entire global economy to the ripple effects of cryptocurrency industry scams. But not regulating it at all is clearly allowing the scams to happen with little to no scrutiny. And so basically, this is complicated. And what I really want to say is that this cannot be rushed. The unintended consequences could be too big, like global economy crashing level big. But one thing I know for certain is that the Senate Agriculture Committee has a bill on deck that is the front runner for regulating the industry. And I spotted way too many concerns in its 68 pages for us to simply let it slide into law, to simply allow the paid-off Senate Agriculture Committee to give the CFTC the policing power over an industry it's already proven itself to be too cozy with. And as for Sam Bankman-Fried, he was arrested in the Bahamas, where FTX is headquartered, on December 12th, the day before he was expected to testify to the House in that hearing that you've heard clips from with the new FTX CEO. Sam Bankman-Fried was the other name on the witness list that morning, but he was removed after news broke of his arrest. Here in the United States, Sam Bankman-Fried has since been indicted on 8 counts of criminal charges, including a combination of wire fraud of both customers and lenders, commodities fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and violation of campaign finance laws for donating more than allowed to individual candidates and by donating in the names of other people. And Sam Bankman-Fried faces over 100 years in prison if convicted on all charges. He is a DC darling no more. But there are holes in our laws that are still open for crypto criminals to slip through. And there's a bunch of paid-off boomers who probably don't understand this stuff, who are poised to decide who will police this industry and how. They are going to make huge decisions about an industry that very few of us understand. And a delicate balance needs to be achieved that simultaneously protects the funds of crypto gamblers while also protecting the rest of the economy from getting caught up in crypto scams. And I don't think the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act strikes that balance. And if you have concerns, the time to speak up is now. Because Congress has a bad habit of acting quickly and rashly after a widely witnessed disaster. And if we stay silent, especially those of us, of which I do not include myself, but I know that there are people in this audience who are very knowledgeable about cryptocurrencies and blockchain, and who would have thoughts about how these things are best regulated. And the time to speak up is now. Because Congress is ready to act, whether their bill is a good one or not. And that's the end of this episode. For real, because for the second episode in a row, we have no executive producers to announce. And also, as much as I really want to be spreading Christmas cheer, I'm not really feeling it because the overall income of this show is going down. And like I said before, I don't understand it. I just had a conversation with my dad/therapist about it, and he tells me to chalk it up to inflation and the holidays being expensive and all of the usual things that the producers of this show always write to me to cheer me up. And I love you guys for doing that. But staring at 8,000 pages of legislation, I am struggling with my life choices right now, and my income is going down. And if the market reinforces that this podcast is simply a masochistic exercise that doesn't have value, I'm starting to think that I should be happy to go and do something that's easier. And I'm honestly already looking at diversifying my income so that I can produce this podcast less often. Because it's been 10 years. And I know that we shouldn't compare ourselves to others and we should celebrate our own successes and all that shit. But Chapo Trap House, which is a strange political punditry podcast, has 38,000 patrons. Tim Dillon, who is excellent at comedic rants, has 37,000 patrons. The Cum Boys, which is spelled exactly as you think it is, has 30,000 patrons. And Congressional Dish has 820 after 10 years. And even my punditry podcast, the easiest, most fun part of my work week, has 547 patrons already after only 6 months. And so the market is telling me right now that Congressional Dish is just not that valuable. Not when compared to punditry, rants, and cum. And I'm about to watch 10 hearings about January 6th and read the full committee report and summarize all of that for you so that you don't have to do those things. Those are my holiday plans. And when that's done, my reward is over 8,000 pages of legislation. An entire year's worth of congressional work dropped on my desk after just a few days. And I try to emotionally prepare myself for this because it happens year after year. But every year when it happens, it just tells me that this podcast isn't big picture changing a damn thing. No matter what I say or do, Congress doesn't change. And the vast, vast majority of this audience is not participating in the value for value model. Or you are, and you just value this podcast at 0, and maybe I should just take the hint. And so I'm really asking myself why I'm doing this. Because if it's valuable, it's not being reflected in the support. And I'm just feeling a lot of bah humbug to end this Congress and this year. And the thing that's keeping me going is the approximately 1,000 beautiful souls that do regularly support this podcast. That small fraction of this audience that has shown me that this podcast has value to you. I'm trying so hard to focus on you. But 8,000 pages. You know, I can do punditry. I can do rants and earmuffs, Dad. But I can also do cum. I can make money other ways. And I'm thinking about it. In conversations with my family, my friends, in my own head, and now with you. I'm thinking about it. Because there's a reason that no one does what I do. It's hard. And if it's not valuable to you, it maybe? I don't know. All I know is that this podcast's fate is in your hands. I know I have one more Congress in me, but I'm watching these market signals, and they are signaling me in other directions. And I don't know exactly what that means. I don't have answers for you about this either. But if you want me to see other signals, if you want me to see that I have a future with this podcast, you know what to do. Or maybe you don't, so let me be clear. Donate. Use any method that works for you on congressionaldish.com, but donate if you want this show to exist. Support it and the business model, because there will not be one without the other. I'm not going to waste your time or risk your money by shilling for companies that I don't own, like Steph Curry and Shaq and Larry David and Giselle and my beloved Tom Brady did. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take ads. I'm not going to do that. But I'm also not going to keep crushing myself with work and watching my income go down. Life's too short, and I've been at this too long. And at some point, I may just need to admit defeat and move on. Or at least do this less and do things that make me more money more often. So I don't know. But that's where I'm at. That's my happy, peppy New Year's message. And I know it's a downer, but it's the truth. And so I will be at this for at least a while longer. The next episode, as I've alluded to, will be my summary of the January 6th investigation, which I'm actually excited to produce. You know, that one's going to be more fun. And I will tell you as much as I can about what's in those 4,000 page monsters that are becoming law as I speak. It's going to take me months, but there's generally a whole lot of nothing that goes on in the beginning of a new Congress, and so we have time. But that's it for Congressional Dish for this year. And thank you. Thank you if you're already paying for Congressional Dish. I hate having to end shows like this because I know that some of you are doing your part. And I'm so grateful for you and for these last 10 years that you have funded this podcasting experiment and kept it going for this long. I truly love each and every one of you. And I hope that this year-end message isn't too much of a bummer. But in this society, if your business isn't growing, it's dying. And we're not growing. And I'm not good at faking or lying. We're not growing. And if that doesn't change soon, then I'm going to have to. And so we'll just have to see what happens in 2023. In the meantime, please tell your friends about the podcast if you like it, help it grow, and please pay for it if you value it. But yeah, until 2023, I hope you have a happy and relaxing holiday. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the show. I do love that you are listening to it. And I will be back with your January 6th investigation extravaganza as soon as I can. I want to have it done by January 6th, but they did 10 hearings, and that's more than I thought they conducted. I really thought it was like 5 or 6, but it's 10 hearings. And so I will have that episode done for you sometime around January 6th. But in the meantime, thank you for supporting this podcast if you do. I'll talk to you in the new year. Okay, bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screen.
don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.